All right. Afternoon, everyone. We're going to start on time to respect the folks who are here and ready to go. And then as other folks join, we'll get them in here as well. This is our August Lunchable results session. So welcome to everyone. These sessions are really intended for us to be a short and focused space for us to strengthen how we drive equitable results and outcomes throughout the county using practical tools and shared learning. Today, we're joined by Tiffany Martinez from the Community Development and Infrastructure Department. She's the communications officer. She's also worked with me on the Equity Expo and has just been a real valuable person to have on our county communications team. She's going to guide us through some tips on working with the media, which is super important in terms of how our messages get framed and amplified. And we're going to have a little presentation, and then some opportunities for discussion to hopefully have you all get into some good conversations with each other about how we can apply what she's going to share with us. And so I will turn it over to Tiffany to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today for this presentation. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, it's visible.
Perfect. Thank you. So today's topic is going to be speaking to the media, a roadmap for a successful interview. And as Sven mentioned, I am the communications officer for the County of Santa Cruz Community Development and Infrastructure Department. So I felt that this road metaphor was very fitting for this presentation, since our department is both public works and planning combined. So before I begin this presentation, in the chat, if you can in one word describe how you feel about speaking to the media, I want to kind of gauge what your thoughts are initially. When I first started this position, the one word I would use to describe how I felt about speaking to the media was mortified. I was absolutely terrified of the idea that I would be on camera or that I would be quoted and that I would be representing our department. And so it was, yeah, very anxious. I see one response is anxious, skeptical. So these are all feelings that I also shared early on, uncertain and wary, nervous. And so the purpose of the presentation here today is to provide you with the tools to work with the media, but also how to work with difficult questions that you may get from the media. So here is an overview of the agenda. So we will be talking about the media. How does it work? What does it look like? What do you do when you get a media inquiry? Next, we'll be talking about preparing for an interview. And then we'll move on to what to do during an interview that includes do's and don'ts and bridging statements and whatnot. And then what to do after the interview. Just because you completed the interview, it does not mean that you're done. So an overview of the media. How do they work? Well, the bottom line is the media are storytellers. They're looking for stories the public will find interesting, and they're all competing for your attention. So if you look out Santa Cruz and look at Santa Cruz Sentinel, they're competing to get your attention. They want to break the story. They want your attention. They want you to go to them for your news source. They're also deadline driven. I'll get more into this later in the presentation, but they often need quick responses and they have a deadline that we have to work with. They also they're also looking for quotes and sound bites. So they're looking for clear, compelling sound bites or quotes for their story. So you may have a 10-minute interview with the media, but they're only really going to either show about 10 seconds of you on TV or maybe a sentence for a quote. But not all is in vain because they use that information to help support the article that they are writing. Next, consider the media as watchdogs. They're here to hold us accountable. They promote transparency and fairness by holding agencies and, of course, the County of Santa Cruz and other organizations accountable. Ring, ring, the media is calling. What do you do? Well, here is a media inquiry roadmap for you. The first step is always remain professional. Thank the media for calling. Sometimes they're going to be calling you during high stress situations. So this includes emergencies, maybe there's a crisis communication, situation that's happening. And I feel like being respectful and remaining professional goes without saying. But when you're dealing with an emergency communication, you may feel a heightened level of stress, more on edge than you normally would feel, and maybe even frustrated. So it's always good to maintain professionalism, even though you're in a high stress situation, because when you're working with a reporter, you want to start building that relationship with the reporter. Next, you're going to gather your basic information. So that includes, who are you talking to? Where are they calling from? They may not share right off the bat their name or the news outlet. They may forget to do that. And that's okay. It's your job to remember to ask for that information. So are you getting a call from KSBW? Because that is a TV news station. Are you getting a call from the Santa Cruz Sentinel? That's more digital and print media. So if you're getting a call from KSBW, you're going to want to know whether or not you're going to be on TV. And the next thing to gather is the reporter's topic or focus of their story. Sometimes they may be reaching out to you because they found your contact information on the website and they may think you're the best person to speak to this topic, but turns out you may not be the subject matter expert. So it's always good to understand and figure out what the reporter is looking for and what the focus of their story is. Next, you also have the option to ask for sample questions. What kind of questions are they looking to get answered? Because again, you may not necessarily be the subject matter expert for this. And whether you're a member of the communications team or you're just someone who works at an organization who is getting this call, you'll want all this information so you can find the best person to speak to whatever the reporter is looking to have answered. And you want to find the best person to do the interview. And most importantly, always ask for the reporter's deadline. Sometimes they forget to tell you their deadline, and that's okay. But it's always important to ask for their deadline, because if their deadline is today at 2 p.m., you want to make sure that you can coordinate that interview before their deadline, or else you risk having them publish an article that says, hey, we reached out to Tiffany at the County of Santa Cruz and she did not respond. That's even worse. And the next step is to schedule that interview. So if you're not a member of your communications team, you'll absolutely want to loop in your communications team or your department's designated media contact. And you're going to give them all the details that you collected: reporter's name, outlet, topic of focus, and share all of those details so that the communications team can work with that to find the best person to speak on this topic, whether that will be you, them, or somebody else. And one last thing that I did add here is avoiding ambush interviews. So if you get a call from the media, you're not required to necessarily speak to them on the spot. It's always important to prepare for an interview versus answering without a plan, especially if you're not a member of the communications team. So this brings me to my next point. How do you prepare for an interview? Well, you start off with your talking points. You have to develop talking points. This is the foundation of the main points that you want to share with your audience and the public, which is your audience. You're going to think of 2, 3, maybe 4 main points that you would want to cover in an interview. And you'll support those main points by gathering facts, figures, and anecdotes to support them. And here on the right-hand side, I have actual talking points that we created for the CZU 5-year anniversary. I'm actually going to call out Jason Hoppin because he did create these talking points, and I thought they were a really good example to include because most of us are very familiar with the CZU fire. So if you look at the talking points on the right, you'll see main point number 1 is acknowledging the impact. When did it happen? How many acres were burned? We're looking back at what happened 5 years ago and acknowledging that this has impacted residents here in Santa Cruz County. Then we move on to main point number 2, the Office of Response Recovery Resilience, also referred to as OR3 here at the county. We want to show that after the CZU fire, we created this department. We created OR3 to lead disaster preparedness, response, and long-term recovery. And that, they now coordinate and they plan for future disasters. And we included that in our supporting points. Now, we often think about what we want to say to the media, but one important thing to note is to anticipate the questions that the reporter might ask and also have those responses ready. Because the last thing you want to do is get caught off guard during an interview. And here's a bigger example of the talking points that I shared: the main point number 1, followed by the supporting points, main point number 2, and again, supporting points, and so on and so forth. Again, similar to If any of you took speech class, you were required to make an outline before presenting. We're not here as extemporaneous speakers. We're here to plan what we want to say and just use that as the foundation of our conversation with the reporter. Great. Does anybody want to share what their talking points were? I won't call any of you out, I promise.
Well, I'm always willing to talk.
Wonderful. Donna, feel free.
It was kind of lucky in our breakout room, Issei and I were both related to arts organizations. And so
Okay.
we were able to use our time very efficiently in coming up with points. Our first overreaching issue was that arts are important to the community, for young people, for citizens, how it benefits the quality of our lives, etc. So that was like the main point, and what we could stand to lose if, because the federal government is cutting back on funding, the arts are receiving less money from the National Endowment for the Arts, and subsequently the California Arts Council and other organizations are giving less money. And in fact, the Packard Foundation, which used to give generously to the arts, is now focusing on social justice because they feel that that's even more important. And while the arts agree that social justice is important, we still have our own things to worry about too. So the talking points, so we're explaining the risks, what we risk losing. And then by offering supporting points, we talked about federal cuts in funding, how much money we stand to lose. From them and from foundations, that individual donors are worried about giving because they don't know what the economy is going to be doing. So they have no idea how well their investment portfolios are going to do or how well their income is going to be if they're still working. And then we have the problem of rising overhead because we need to cover people's health insurance, their salaries, money for the orchestra, and other overhead costs like rentals and things like that. So those are the things that we kind of talked about, the overall thing, and then the supporting points.
Wow, that was a good amount of detail, Donna. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's really good to have your talking points, again, to guide that conversation with the media. And you're very prepared. If the media calls you, you have something ready, Donna. Thank you so much for sharing.
But and Issei said those were the same things he could use too. So within the
Yeah.
10 minutes, both of us got something out of it.
That's very efficient. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay.
So we have our talking points ready. What's the next step? Well, we have an interview to do. So these are some do's and don'ts. I am going to provide everyone with a cheat sheet. I actually have 3 separate documents that are full of details because I can actually talk about this forever and ever and ever, but I don't want to do that to all of you. So I wanted to pick out the main do's and don'ts. And again, this will be in your cheat sheet. There'll be a lot more do's and don'ts on that. And green light, stick to your talking points. The reason why developing talking points is so important is because you're using that to communicate to the media, to the public, the main points that you want to share. Stick to them. Don't go into different tangents. Stick to your talking points. Be factual. If you don't know something, say so. When I first started interviewing with the media, I was so terrified at the idea that they would ask me a question that I didn't know, and I felt like I just had to know it all. You don't have to know every little detail. Sometimes questions comes up that you're not really anticipating, and you can always tell the reporter, say, hey, that's a really great question. Unfortunately, I don't have the details to that. And then ask if you can follow up with the details via email. That way, you're not sharing information that you're not 100% certain about. And we always want to make sure that we're being factual when we're speaking to the reporter. One big thing is we don't want to say I. It's if you're doing an interview that isn't specifically about you, don't say I statements. You're representing your department or your organization. Instead, say the department's name. Say the department worked on this road project. The Department of Community Development and Infrastructure worked on this road project, and then you can give the details. Or we finished this project. You don't want to say I worked on this road project because I'm representing my department, Community Development and Infrastructure, not just me. Assume everything is on the record. So I actually learned this about a year ago where I was talking to a reporter and I was describing one of our projects, and we didn't necessarily agree that I was on the record, but we also didn't necessarily agree that I was off the record. And at this point in time, I did not assume that I was on the record. And the way I described this road project was maybe less detailed than I would have. And I was actually quoted in an article for something that I didn't realize I was on the record for. So this is very important. Whenever you're speaking to a reporter, assume that it's all on record. Speak as if all comments could be published or aired or even shown on television. The don'ts. Do not enter these don'ts at all. Don't wing it. Always have a plan prepared. Be strategic. Figure out what your main points are. What are your supporting points? Always have your talking points to guide the conversation. And I think this next one goes without saying, but don't argue with the reporter. Depending on what is going on, there may be some controversial topics that the reporter is covering, and they may be asking some difficult questions, maybe questions that are negatively framed. It is not personal. Don't ever argue with the reporter. Again, you're trying to build a relationship with the reporter. You're not enemies. You work better together when you have a strong relationship. Don't repeat negative language in the question. So if the reporter asks, why is the county misusing taxpayer dollars? Your response is not going to be, I never heard that the county was misusing taxpayer dollars. Instead, you want to reframe that answer to a more positive, something like, the county is investing taxpayer dollars into this project that will help support the community. The reason why you want to avoid negative language and repeating that is because you can be inadvertently quoted, or it could be added to the headline, like the county denies misusing taxpayer dollars. And instead, you want to use more positive framing. And again, your cheat sheet will also have more examples of negative language and what you can say, what is the wrong thing to say, and what is the good thing to say. And don't forget body language. If you've ever taken like public speaking course, you know that your nonverbal communication is like 80% of your total communication. So when you're speaking to the reporter, especially if you're on camera, stand straight, look at the reporter when you're speaking to them. Don't fidget, don't look away. Your nonverbal communication communicates a lot. Okay, this wouldn't be a presentation without a quick break and story time from me. Here we're looking at Mountain Charlie Road on February 29, 2024. So some of you may have heard of Mountain Charlie Road. It was a big story. And if you look at this picture, you'll see that there is a crack on the top side of this photo. This is a driveway to 5 different houses. And then you'll see towards the street kind of sign, the A-frame, there's a crack. This road was partially open, which basically means cars were still able to drive through. This is what happened less than a week after that. So on March 4th, the entire road collapsed. So it went from February 29th looking like this to March 4th looking like that. And what had happened was there was a week's worth of rain, and the soil underneath, there was a deep-seated landslide. So basically a landslide underneath the road. So this roadway was slowly moving and then eventually turned into this. Then it looked like that on March 25th. And then it looked like that on April 26th, and it just kept getting worse. And then on May 5th, it looked like this. It was completely collapsed, completely closed. And if you're familiar with Mountain Charlie Road, it is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. This road is a road that people use if Highway 17 is backed up. It's a road that services hundreds of homes up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So when this road collapsed, the commutes of residents living along Mountain Charlie Road went from 15 minutes all the way up to 45 minutes to an hour. They were very vocal. And of course, when this happened, the news caught wind. And we saw stories like this, and this, and this, and this. So as you can see, we got a lot of media coverage on this story, and it was my first taste of, I guess, emergency communication. And I was prepared. I had talking points. And then I got a call from ABC7, one of the big dogs. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to ask very difficult questions. But I'm prepared. I have my talking points. What I did wrong was I didn't anticipate what questions they were going to ask. Instead, I only thought about what I wanted to say. And I've never told this story before. And they asked me a really difficult question that still haunts me to this day. And it's, if the county can't afford to repair Mountain Charlie Road, why should residents continue to trust local government or pay taxes? Why do residents need you when you're unable to maintain your own infrastructure? I was completely unprepared. I was caught off guard. And I actually looked like this when he asked me that question. And instead of responding the way I should have, which would have been using a bridging statement and going back to my main points, I instead said a completely random answer that was not relevant to what the reporter was asking. And it did not acknowledge what the reporter was asking. So I didn't provide a good answer. And this is where we have our bridging statements. So this is a tool we can use to, again, go back to our main points. Bridging statements are short statements that you can use, and you can think of them as a steering wheel in your conversation. So if a reporter asks a difficult question or a negatively framed question, you can use bridging statements and then do a U-turn back to your main points. So for bridge statement number 1, you could say, that's one perspective, but what's important is, and then you go back to your main point. Bridging statement number 2, that's important. And what I want to share is, and then again, you go back to your main points. Never say no comment. You don't want to be quoted saying no comment. You don't want to see it on TV. You don't want to see it printed anywhere. No comment leaves room for people to fill that information with stories, maybe even misinformation. You are telling your organization's story. You're providing the facts, you're providing the details. And if you don't do that, somebody else will, and it may not be in your favor. And why is that? Because we don't like uncertainty. I'm going to take us back to social psychology. I always mispronounce his name, so I do apologize. Gert Hofstede's Cultural Dimension. So he is a Dutch social psychologist. And if you've ever taken psychology course, you might have learned of the cultural dimension. So these are basically 6 cultural dimensions. And it's a framework that he developed. But the one that we're really focusing on here is the uncertainty avoidance at the bottom in purple. Cultures may have a higher tolerance for uncertainty avoidance and others do not. They have, it's either high or low, because as a society, we don't like uncertainty. It makes us uncomfortable not knowing. We like to know what's going on. We're very curious individuals, and uncertainty leads to anxiety for a lot of people. And it's our job as a spokesperson to reduce anxiety by replacing uncertainty with clarity, confidence, and consistent messaging. Again, you have to tell your organization's story with facts, and you don't want someone else to tell your story for you. Now, I want to go back to that haunting question that ABC7 asked me. What could I have done differently? Well, with bridging statements, I could have said something like this. Mountain Charlie Road is a very complex situation, and fixing it takes time, or takes significant resources and time. What's important to know is, the bridging statement, is that we're committed to finding a safe long-term solution. Okay, we're done. We did the interview. What do you do after the interview? You're not fully done yet. After the interview, check out the article. I do something that's called media tracking for my department. And what it is whenever I send a press release or I do an interview or somebody in my organization does an interview, I go back and I look for it. Why? Well, if I really love the article, I'll email the reporter and let them know. Again, we're trying to build relationships with reporters. We're trying to have a good rapport with each other, because when you have a better relationship, it's easier to collaborate together. And another reason to look at the article is, what if something was misquoted? What if I was misquoted? Or maybe something that's being reported isn't 100% accurate. You have the option to email the reporter to issue a correction and say, hey, of course you want to be polite about it. Hey, I noticed that this was said in your article, but the truth is this, this, and this. And then you ask them to correct it. Now, I added this towards the end, which is building confidence, because to build confidence, it's using the tools that I just shared with you during this presentation. The number one thing to build confidence is you have the right of way. You are the expert here. So with that, proceed with confidence. When you're speaking to a reporter, you are the expert about what you're talking about. And not only that, once you're prepared for that interview with your talking points, it makes you feel so much better because you know what direction you're going to go in. Stick to your talking points. Don't let anything go awry, go astray. Stay with your talking points. And anticipate those tricky questions, and practicing them to turn back to your main points using bridging statements is also something that is really helpful. It'll reduce anxiety and help you build confidence while you're interviewing. And the last but not least, yield to practice. Give yourself time to rehearse out loud. When I have a TV interview, I print out my talking points and I read them out loud in my office as if I'm doing the TV interview. And the goal isn't to memorize everything that I'm going to say, but instead just practicing out loud. So when the questions are asked, I can say, hey, I remember talking about that. And then you kind of go back and you paraphrase what's on your talking points, because when you're doing a TV interview, you can't hold your talking points right in front of you. So you really have to rely on the practicing. And for me, practicing makes me feel much better. It reduces a lot of the anxiety. I feel prepared.